now. Okay, good morning everybody. My name's Shannon Smith and I'm the Member Support Officer for Community Woodlands Association. I'm excited to introduce you today to Donald McPhillamy, who's one of CWA's members, and he's going to present today about huts and hutting. Donald is also, more importantly, one of Reforesting Scotland's 1,000 Hut team members and is passionate about huts, hutting and all things in between, hence the reason he's presenting the session today. Donald's going to set the scene for you and share some rather wonderful images of various huts from Scotland and around the world. Yesterday, when I was finalising the slides, I found myself daydreaming actually about how wonderful it would be to have such huts in woodlands, and actually I was really reminded of my own childhood and exploring and den making and just having that opportunity of that kind of safe space that you could be in nature. So it was lovely. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Donald's got to say and for him sharing that with you all today. So without any further delay, I'm going to hand over to Donald to begin. Donald, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that I'm very excited. Don't know about passionate, but I'm very excited to be leading this discussion about hutting today because it combines two of my favourite things, which are huts and community woodlands. And so this is hopefully going to be the start of increasing interest in huts in community woodlands. We're also joined this morning. I'd like to introduce Richard Heggie, who's one of the people participating, and Richard and I. Richard's also part of the 1,000 Huts team and knows more about planning for huts in Scotland than anybody else. So if you've any questions which specifically relate to planning, then Richard is very much the right person to address them to. So I'm going to talk for a bit, maybe half an hour or so, kind of outlining what huts are and where it's going. It's all very exciting. And then after that, I hope maybe some of you would like to share your situations and just briefly tell us, where you are in your hutting journey, if you are on a journey. And if you have a question, then we'll do our best to answer the questions. So I'm part of the 1,000 Huts campaign run by Reforesting Scotland. And and history of hutting in Scotland. Now, there's always been huts in Scotland, they sort of date from prehistoric times, when everybody lived in a hut or multiple huts. And especially in areas where there was like livestock grazing, then people would move from their winter huts to their summer huts. So there was always like sheilings and summer huts that people could move to. And so in our DNA, really, our love affair with huts, and I think whenever you stay in a hut, you visit a hut, you build a hut, you're connecting with that past in some shape or form. And there's always been like little huts for agricultural workers. We think of shepherd's huts for forestry workers. Unfortunately, they're mostly like caravans, parked up in a loading bay somewhere. So people have had huts, for a long time. But the kind of huts that we're talking about today are really on the model of the Nordic countries and Eastern European countries, where people, usually families, would have their own hut somewhere out in the wilds where they can escape to at weekends or for holidays. And that's the kind of hut that the 1,000 Huts have been promoting over the last period of time. And I'll talk about some of the other kinds of huts as well, but that's the main sort of hut. Now, this map here, can you see the map okay? The history of hutting in Scotland? Yeah, this was developed by a guy called Hugh Gentleman for the Scottish government, because there was a question about how many huts were there in Scotland and nobody knew. And so he went out in 1999, or at least a report came out in 1999, which identified that there were about 650 huts in Scotland. Now, most of these huts date from after either the First World War or the Second World War, and there were very often people who'd come back from the war and they're I don't know, a bit shell-shocked, and there were a lot of and we're coming back to not the best housing conditions sometimes in the cities. So the idea of having sort of like a wee button ben out in the countryside that they could go to sort of just look after at the weekends and just get a bit of peace and quiet and tranquility was something which was very appealing. And these hut sites or individual huts, they really came about because somebody would ask the local landowner, is it okay to put up a hut? And these were the places where the local landowners were sympathetic and said, yes, that's okay, put it up, and I understand why you're asking. But then over time, basically generations changed, attitudes changed, and there's been a decline in the number of huts. And because these arrangements were very much just verbal agreements at the time, there was nothing on paper. There was no contract. There was no lease. There was nothing like that. And so gradually, a lot of these hut sites, the people were turfed out, and or else the sites fell into neglect for one reason or another. Sometimes they were developed into caravan parks. Sometimes they're developed into housing areas, but for whatever reason, they declined. So that by the time of this survey, there were about 650 left. And we think probably by now there's less than 500 of these old style sort of early 20th century huts. And the biggest conglomeration of them is at Carbeth, which is north of Glasgow, north of Milngavie. And there's about 150 of the 500 remaining huts are on that one site. And they've managed to keep going, and there was a lot of strife and rent strikes and so on, but it's ended up in the happy situation that the Hutters group has formed its own community association and has actually bought the land on which the huts stand. So the Hutters at Carbeth are now their own landlords, and I'm not saying they're not without tension and difficulties sometimes, but it's a happy arrangement that they've ended up in. But the remainder of the huts which are scattered around Scotland from the early days don't really have very much security at all. So the 1,000 Huts campaign is about having a new wave of huts in Scotland. And one of the things we think is really important is that there is some kind of security of tenure for the Hutters, and they can't just lose their precious huts, on the whim of a landowner. Now, I want to just relate this also to the Scandinavian countries, because we think we've maybe got 500 of the huts, a few more now because we're building the new huts. But if you take a country like Finland or a country like Norway, and it's the same for all the Nordic countries, it's the same for Eastern European countries, it's the same for many parts of the world. Canada, people have got huts in Canada, for example. If you think of like Norway and Finland, populations very similar to Scotland, and we've got about 500 huts. They've each got about 400,000 huts, which shows it's just part of their way of life, and it's part of the reason why folk from the Nordic countries tend to be in tune with their natural environment, and they visit their huts and get great sort of mental and physical well-being from having access to their huts. So I'll just move on, I hope. Does that move everybody on? Yeah, okay. Well, here's what a hut looks like, a traditional hut. They're very often green. Sometimes they're brown, sometimes they're multicolored. There's one at Carbeth which is like rainbow colored, but that's kind of tends to be frowned upon. Very often they're kind of bottle green and with a felt roof, and they're patched up and maintained by their owners, and very much recycled material goes into them. Very often, and that helps to keep the costs down and so on. Now, this hut at Edelston, Edelston's an interesting site, and that was people from the south of Edinburgh and Midlothian, some of them from mining communities, got together and asked a local farmer, and this is about halfway between Edinburgh and Peebles, off the Peebles Road. And Peebles is actually quite a little centre. It's got 3 different hutting sites in and around Peebles. So you tend to get these little kind of concentrations, little clusters of huts in different parts of the country. So this one's north of Peebles, and there's about 30 huts, I think, at Edelston, in different stages of repair, and some in really quite a good condition because they've passed on to different generations, and a few have been sold and bought by new people and so on who've got them back up to standard again. So some lovely huts at Edelston. And this is what huts aren't. Huts are not holiday lets or glamping pods. So huts are not like well-designed modern buildings which sit on holiday parks. That's a different thing, and we wouldn't have needed to form the 1,000 Huts campaign to encourage holiday let huts because they already existed. The legislation already existed. So there's nothing to stop somebody having a bit of land and getting a license for a holiday park and then building huts and renting them out to visitors to the area or whoever. So that's all kind of a well-trodden path, and it's not what 1,000 Huts, not what we understand as being family huts. So they're not bothies or hostels, so they're mostly used by individual families or couples or individuals. They're not tiny houses. I mean, this is a really interesting new development, where people are kind of shrinking their needs and aspirations in order to be able to buy or rent a house which is affordable. But they're still houses, these tiny houses, and they still have to conform to the building regulations for houses, whereas huts are in a different category. And this is what huts are. They're usually owned, built and maintained by a couple or a family who pay a ground rent for the privilege of doing that. And so, the responsibility not of the community woodland group, for example, to maintain them, the responsibility of the owner of the hut who looks after the huts and simply pays a ground rent to the owner of the land or the manager of the land. So this is the person who really started the 1,000 Huts campaign, who's Ninian Stewart, who lives at Falkland Estate, and he proposed the idea of the 1,000 Huts to a Reforesting Scotland gathering about, I don't know, it was about 2010, I think, in Torridon. We had our annual gathering there that year, and Ninian had come up with the idea of not only did he want his own hut, which is what this is, he built himself a very modest hut of I think about 8 square meters floor area, and in fact you're allowed up to 30 square meters floor area. So he built himself a very modest hut in his woods at Falkland, and he absolutely loves it, and he says it's his favorite place. and he then thought, well, very unselfishly, thought it'd be nice if other people had the opportunity to build and live in huts as well. So that's where the whole idea came from. I can't read that because it's so small. What does that say?
Campaigning for planning policy change.
Oh yeah, thank you. Campaigning for planning. That was the first thing we had to sort out, really, was there was no such thing as a hut for people to apply for. It didn't exist in planning legislation since the 1949 Town and Country Planning Act. There wasn't such a thing as a hut, so therefore people couldn't apply for them. It didn't stop people building huts, but it was all under the radar, whatever huts had been built. And so the first challenge of the 1,000 Huts campaign was to change the law. That seems like quite a big challenge, but we did it. Can you read that one out?
So you're campaigning for a change in building regulations.
So yeah, going hand in hand with planning is building regulations, and basically we've been able to reduce the load of what's required to get. You don't need a building warrant for a hut, but you do need to have permission for the stove, because that's the thing which could really be dangerous and burn your hut down. So that's one thing. It sort of still requires permission, but the rest of it, as long as you conform to sort of like a fairly standard build, and that's outlined in our 1000 Huts website, then you don't need to have a building warrant for a hut, which obviously takes a lot of bother away.
A voluntary code of conduct between hutters and landowners.
Thank you, Sharon. This is great service. Yes, as I was saying earlier, it was all unwritten agreements previously, which changed over time, and people's memories were faulty and so on. So we think there needs to be some kind of a written agreement between the hutter and the landowner, and we've suggested some kind of rules for that, or guidance for that.
Pilot site at Carnoch Woods.
Yeah, I'll say a bit more about the Carnoch Woods site. This is a part of the National Forest Estate managed by Forestry and Land Scotland, and we've got a trial site there, a pilot study site there, which I'll say a bit more about.
Supporting a growing movement.
Yeah, just kind of a bit like Reforesting Scotland, exists to kind of support, the reforesting movement, including community woodlands. Then likewise, the 1000 Huts campaign is there to kind of support individuals and groups throughout Scotland and beyond, who are interested in getting huts built. So this is the definition of a hut, and before it could go into legislation via the Scottish Government, they needed a definition of what a hut actually is, and they asked us to write the definition, so that was quite nice. So we came up with this definition, which I think has stood the test of time so far fairly well, and this is what you need to try and conform to if you want to have a hut in Scotland, an official hut in Scotland. So it's a simple building used intermittently as recreational accommodation. It's not a house. You would be expected to have a house, access to a house, which is where you register to vote and pay your council tax and all the other things that make you a good citizen. But a hut is not that. A hut is in addition to where you live normally. Internal floor area, no more than 30 square meters, but you can have a bit of decking, veranda around about that as well. Constructed with low impact materials, and it's off-grid, largely off-grid. I mean, if you want to rig up your own solar powered lighting system, that's fine. If you want to bring water into a standpipe or even plumb it into your hut, that's fine as well. It's not saying you have to be off-grid, but the norm would be that huts would be off-grid. And removable at the end of its life. So it's kind of like a temporary building. I suppose every house is like a temporary building in a sense, but huts are there to be built in a way that they could be removable at the end of its life if needs be, but in reality they kind of roll on and roll on and roll on, like the ones at Carbeth, which are over 100 years old now. And they get patched up and patched up and patched up until you can't really say how much is original hut and how much is kind of like, changes and maintenance has taken place over the years. I can't read that one, Sharon.
Huts may be built singly or in groups.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So we produced this publication, which is was really aimed at the planners, and it answered some of the questions that I think increasingly are kind of fairly obvious, you know, what the answers are, but whenever we were writing this, we were kind of making it all up as we went along. So there's a lot of sort of the original ideas have gone into that, and I think it's a slim publication, but I think it answers quite a lot of the questions around huts and hutting and planning for huts. And also the building regulations, as I said earlier, as long as you conform to our good practice guide, which is on the website, then you won't run into any difficulties with building regulations. And the voluntary code, yeah, we've covered this already, really. Okay, so what might the next generation of huts look like? Well, we kind of know what old huts look like. They're usually green, made out of wood with a felt roof, all shapes and sizes, a bit tumble down, kind of shanty town sort of look to them. New huts could look like that, or they could look like a lot of other designs as well. And already there's some really interesting designs coming forward for huts, and you'll see some of them in the this new Art of Hutting book, which was written by Patrick McQueen, and there's some lovely photographs in there of some of the new designs for huts. This is one which was a model which was built by Peter Kont, who's again a member of the team, and he is an architect who has come up with some nice innovative designs for huts. But you can go even more modern and come up with, these are North Woods designs, Bernard Plantero's up at Ullapool. He's got some very nice designs. And this is on Falkland Estate as well. It was a little one that was put up for the Big Tent festivals, which took place at Falkland a few years ago. And this is in Shrieach, Bothy, which is part of the Shieling project. That's in the woods near Aviemore. That's the inside. And this is Sweeney's Bothy on Egg, which is also part of the Shieling project. And this is a lovely one because the idea is that it can be rented by an artists and writers who can go there and have complete seclusion and time to think and time to be creative. And so that's the kind of market that's aimed at. And again, lots of light coming in, quite remote, beautiful views. So I'd like to say something now about the Carnock Woods site, the pilot study project, which is in the west of Fife. So we've been going for a couple of years with the 1,000 Huts campaign, and we'd had a really nice response from the Scottish Government. In fact, we went to see the Minister, I'm trying to remember his name. Anyway, went to see the Minister for the Environment to ask him about, well, to tell him about hutting and to discuss it with him and to make it happen. And after there were about 4 of us on one side of the table and four of them, including civil servants, on the other side of the table. And we had we presented, you know, our vision of what huts were going to be. And we had a good discussion about it and the technicalities of it. And then at the end of the meeting, he said something that I didn't really expect, which was, he turned to his civil servant next to him and he said, "This is going to make people happy, isn't it?" And the civil servant nodded his head and he said, "Right," he said, "we'll do it." So I thought that was lovely insight into government, and I'm not sure that's the way it works all the time, but it got launched on a wave of happiness, so that's a good start in life. So a couple of years, so because there was like a bit of a positive vibe in the Scottish Government and amongst the Department of the Environment and so on, then I think that was picked up by the Forestry Commission. They all talked to each other behind the scenes. And they decided they wanted some of the action as well. So they came to us and said, you know, we'd like to propose a pilot study site. And we said, yes, definitely interested. So they hired a minibus and they took some of us around in the minibus, around 3 different sites, 2 in Fife and 1 near Callander. And the first site they took us to was it was a bit like Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. So the first site that they took us to was too cold, because it was an open site, hadn't been planted yet. It was just like windswept kind of site. And although it had sort of nice topography, we just thought, well, it doesn't feel right as a hutting site, you know, nicer to be in a sort of nestled into a woodland. And then the second site they took us to was too hot. And that was it's too hot because the trees were all falling down. It was a plantation of Scots pine, and you could see where there'd been wind blow in the past, and there was more wind blow quite recently. So we thought, no, don't really want to have our huts nestled in amongst the wind blow, with more wind blow taking place. And then they took us to, we were getting a bit sort of despondent at this stage, wondering if they really kind of understood. But they took us to the third site, and that was just right. And that was lovely. And that was the Carnock Wood site, which is near Salon in the west of Fife. And I might have got a slide of it. Yes, that's what the site looks like as you kind of enter it. So it's a 40 hectare, which happens to be 100 acres, which is just by coincidence. 40 hectare woodland, quite diverse. Plantation areas, but also kind of felled and regenerated, and quite natural parts to it as well. And this kind of big open area next to the road, which is growing a lot of bracken at the moment, and that's a bit of an issue, like what happens to the bracken. But it lends itself to hutting because there's kind of like different edges where you can put the huts on the edge. There's that edge that you're looking at is birch, young birch woodland. So the huts fit in very well into that edge. So that was in 2013. I was looking it up. 2013 was that time that photograph was taken, and it's taken from then until now to actually get the huts up, and they're building at the moment. Currently, there's huts going up in Carnock Wood. So it's been quite a long journey, but it was the first of this type of hutting development. And I think it was a pilot study, and we would definitely do things differently if we were doing it again. But this was a pioneer effort, and it's taken a long time, but I think we're getting there, finally getting there. And this is a big larch tree, which is in the next to the hutting site. And I put that in because we had the Out of Doors team from Radio Scotland came to visit, and Ewan McElraith and Mark Stephen climbed that tree, and they had that as the kind of the main photograph on their Facebook group for a while. So it's kind of famous tree now. And this was some filming we did with Newsnight Scotland, and they came to the wood, but of course we didn't have any huts to show them, so everybody was having to use a lot of imagination as to what this would look like with huts. And then they went to Carbeth in the afternoon. This is what usually happens. They kind of come to Carnock in the morning, and then they want to see some huts, so they go to Carbeth in the afternoon and do some filming there, and people put 2 and 2 together. So this is this is now current. This is 2023, 2024, and this is the first hut to have gone up. And this is Linda's hut, and she absolutely loves her hut. This is John and Moon. Moon's a builder who's helping John to build his hut. Quite an unusual design, and that's next door to Linda's. This is as far as Liam and his partner have got. This is Ian and Alice, who are from Glasgow, and they're getting on well with theirs. They've got the sort of basic structure up, and they're hoping to finish off early summer. Some have only just got off the ground. This is the second most far forward. This is Des and Bev, and they've been working really hard to get their hut built, and they're really getting there. This is a hut raising group. So the hutters, it's great. The hutters are actually helping each other and forming a real community already, and lending each other time and tools and materials and so on, ideas. This is Des and Bev's hut again in this winter. And that's the view, that's the sunset that you get looking over what used to be a coal bin in West Fife. So those are all Carnac shots, and it's really exciting to see the huts going up now, having spent so long getting it to this stage. But it's just a fact of life in Northern and Eastern Europe. These huts are mostly from Finland, and they're very often used for outdoor activities, like cross-country skiing, for example, is very, very popular. And also foraging and shooting, shooting game, and organized slightly differently to how we organize it in this country. But these huts very often used for seasonal activities like bird watching or foraging or whatever. So huts and community woodlands. Yeah, bringing, first of all, happiness, as Richard, Richard will have to tell me his name, Richard. Yeah. Lochhead. Lochhead, that's it. Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, Richard Lochhead, who was the minister at the time, who said it'll make people happy, and it's true. Hutting community can benefit existing community in lots of ways. Yes, well, people who come and stay in their huts, they want to, buy food in the local shops. They want to sort of go to the local pub. They want to sort of buy meals out if there's places providing them. They need local tradesmen sometimes. They're quite happy to get stuck in with volunteer activities sometimes. If there's a sort of tree planting effort required, then some of the hutters would go and join in with that. And so there's lots of ways in which the hutting community can connect with the existing geographical community for mutual benefit. Another income stream, yes, for the community woodland group. And so they'll be paying a ground rent, and really for very little effort on behalf of the landlord, because they're looking after their own huts and solving the problems as they go along. And most woodlands most woodlands have out-of-the-way places for off-grid huts. Yeah, I mean, just about every woodland has got sites suitable for huts, because they tend to be in bits of the woodland which are not very productive anyway, sort of awkward places and wet next to wet ground or next to water or whatever. I mean, if there's water available in the way of ponds or lochs or whatever, well, then that's absolutely fantastic, because that is a real appeal to the people who would be staying there. New friends in the forest, lights in the glen. So it's a way of bringing people into the local area in a kind of benign and positive sort of way. So you'd actually have some more people in the community, albeit intermittently, because they'll be going back to wherever they live normally. Two books that have come out fairly recently about hutting. The Art of Hutting came out just at the end of last year, and is a really beautiful kind of glossy coffee table type book, but full of real stories and full of great ideas. And then Huts, written by Leslie Riddick, who most of you will know, broadcaster and journalist. And we were really gobsmacked when she told us that she was doing a PhD on hutting, in comparing Scotland with Norway. So she's been involved with the project at the outset, and her book is a wonderful read and gives a lot of background about hutting in Scotland and also hutting in Norway, and doing a sort of like a bit of a discussion about why they're different and what the different histories have led us to. And she's very excited about the possibility of more huts in Scotland as well. This is just coming up on the 20th of April. We've had, over the years, we've had a number, maybe 5, 6, 7 hutters rallies dotted around the country. And the last one we had was in February 2020. Just before, we just squeezed in before the pandemic, people are kind of beginning to hear reports from China, and so we managed to have our hutters rally, and then everything stopped, so this is the first one since COVID, and the previous one that was in Dundee in 2020 was a big success. We had sort of 250 people there, and a lot of interest, and a lot of connections were made. So this is now kind of picking it up again where it was left off. So I'd really recommend that if you're interested in huts and hutting and meeting people who are doing it already. It'll be a great event. And finally, that's our website, our resource hub, 1000huts.org. And if you go there, there's an awful lot of information, and it'll tell you quite a lot, answer quite a lot of your questions. So yeah, any questions? And don't know if that comes now or not, but there we are. So yes, if you want to ask a question, maybe I think if you put your hand up virtually or in reality, and if you could say your name and which part of the country you're in or which community woodland group you're with, and then ask your question, then we'll kind of get an idea of who you are. Thank you.
Valerie, do you want to come in?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Donald. Round of applause for that. That was wonderful. So my name is Valerie Steele. I'm actually a community councillor with the Speanbridge, Roybridge and Achnacarry Community Council in the Lochaber area. And recently, as you may know, I'm just going to read this out so I can keep my timing good. So as you may know, the Scottish Government invited communities and organisations to submit their proposals for a national park. And Lochaber has been shortlisted as one of 5 for a national park status. And this summer will be assessed, will be a general assessment for that, and the national park will be established in 2026. So I'm just wondering, with our particular community council area is the largest community council area in the Highlands of Scotland, and we have vast amount of woodlands and forestry, and estate owners, and I was just wondering, given the criteria of the national park and what it has to bring positive benefits to the environment and the economy, and it supports progressive development, addressing climate emergency and improving public and community well-being. So my question is, what role and what would they provide, the benefits provide, the concepts of hutting have on our community? And how would landowners be able to assess their land suitable for hutting? And could you, if this was a question for the person that did the planning, obviously I've now see your website will have details on planning and legislation. But I was interested to see that you had a hut on Egg that was being rented out for artists. And I wondered then, does that mean that, you're saying it's not a holiday letting or a pod or anything, but people can rent them out to other people? And if they are off-grid, to what extent are they off-grid? Because people would need access to them. So if I had a plot of land on the other side of the railway, and I walked over, you know, the British Rail's access route to land, could I just build a hut, and how would I access my equipment to it? So if you could answer any of those, would be lovely. Thank you.
Well, you certainly rounded up quite a few questions there, Val. Nobody needs to ask any more questions. You've kind of picked them all. I'll try and answer some of those questions. Benefits to the community. Well, I think, as I said earlier, there's going to be financial benefits to the local community because there's going to be shops, hotels, pubs, craft shops, you name it. This is going to be a group of people coming in, and this will be kind of one of the main places that they go for holidays. So they'll be kind of got their holiday budget, to spend whenever they're there. But also I think there can be, joint projects set up. We were looking at a sort of like a footpath project, between the hut site and the local village, which would be supported by the hutters and the villagers, so there could be joint projects as well. Progressive development, yeah, I think this is very progressive. I think this is just a sort of like something that's not really been part of the picture before. National parks are definitely about, I think they're actually more about economic development than they are about, protecting nature. The two national parks that we have at the moment, I think, they don't function that well in terms of protecting nature, but they do attract in business and economic development. So I think huts would be a sort of like a form of progressive development, which would enhance that. But I think the people who would be the hutters would be, very sensitive to nature. They'd be coming to an area because they like the nature, they like the landscape, and I think they would be very supportive of schemes which are improving nature and protecting nature in the area. Assessing land for hutting, we might come on to that at the end. How do you sort of assess whether you've got a good site or not? The shielding project, which I mentioned, which is the one in Egg and also at Aviemore, yes, that is a kind of a slightly different category to the normal kind of family hut idea, because it is aimed at artists and so on. So I guess in a way that is kind of a bit more like a short holiday let rather than a family hut. But it's a really kind of exciting project, which I think is really, a very innovative idea, which could be replicated in other places. And finally, on your off-grid, we're thinking that you probably wouldn't drive your car to your front door of your hut. You'd probably leave the car at some point and then backpack in what you have to the hut, hopefully not too far, reasonable distance. But it does give you an awful lot more flexibility as to where the hut can be located. So it doesn't have to be on a road, it doesn't have to be, drivable. It could be sort of tucked away somewhere further. And that's certainly the case at Carnock, where people have got a car park at the one end of the site, but they're going to be carrying or wheelbarrowing, their goods, their belongings up to wherever their hut is, which might be a distance of a few hundred yards, something like that. So it depends how adventurous you are, really, as to how far away your hut can be from civilization. I'll take some more questions then. Sharon, do you want to feed those in?
Thanks, Valerie. Barbara, can you come in now? Thanks.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm not coming on screen because, as you maybe can hear, I've got the dreaded lurgy at the moment, so I won't shock you with how I look. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. First one is, you didn't mention if there's a density of the buildings that would be, okay or not okay. And I guess that's a consideration as regards fire. You mentioned just now about vehicles, so that's one of my questions, is about vehicular access. In particular, when I saw the people raising whatever it was they were raising manually, you know, is it do people bring vehicles in for construction or not? And if there is no arrangement really about not having vehicle access, what's to prevent people with caravans coming in, which seem to fit your mobility criteria, and using it as some kind of caravan site, formal or informal? So that's that. And then the other bit that I've got is really about the output, so waste management and pollution. How, you know, you didn't mention how people are managing their toilet waste and the effect of pollution, because as we know with the North Coast 500, whilst it's a lovely idea, you know, that people, and I think it's true that people respect our natural places more if they are familiar with them. Unfortunately, we've got something like 4 million people just in Scotland who are not familiar with natural spaces and don't know how to respect them. So I'm wondering how you expect waste management and pollution to be managed. And finally, linked to that really is, what about the effects on the negative effects, unfortunately, on biodiversity and the environmental impact? Because, you know, I'm the sort of person who wants to do this and, you know, go out and sleep in the woods, and, you know, I'm a caravaner, camper, done all this, still do it. But I'm well aware that the best thing that we can do for biodiversity is leave the woods alone and not be in them, you know. So I'm just wondering if you can make some comments on that. And I'm not trying to be negative, I'm just trying to bring in the other side of this as well. Thanks.
Okay, Barbara, well, that's a good collection of questions as well. You're all trying to get in quite a few questions. Density of huts. I mean, I think maybe we need to think of this in terms of, there would be a group of hutters, and they would be the same group of hutters, and they would have some kind of little kind of management group. They would be connected to each other. They'd discuss things. In the case of Carnock Woods, they actually had to form a limited company. Because that was what the Forestry Commission said. They needed to deal with, you know, one entity rather than individual hutters. Now, I'm not sure you want to force everybody to go down that road, but I think it makes a lot of sense to have some kind of entity which kind of represents the hutters. So when it comes to things like density of huts, you know, they would decide themselves, you know, how dense the huts would be, how comfortable they feel as to, you know, how far apart the huts would be. I mean, there is a sort of like a basic rule of like 6 meters or something like that, that you wouldn't be, you know, closer than 6 meters to the next hut, but, you know, how far, most huts wouldn't be that close. So so that could be discussed by the group. That also answers your question about caravans, etc., because there wouldn't be any question of, you know, just random people coming in with caravans and, you know, setting up, and also the same thing about waste management and pollution. You know, it would be the same group of people who would be sort of like making the decisions and taking responsibility for the site. So there wouldn't be sort of any other people coming in and making a mess. You know, that just wouldn't be part of it. Vehicles for construction, yes. You do need, if possible, you know, it's a great benefit if you've got some kind of access. And at Carnock, it was really interesting to see how the different hutters approached that, because we had everything from tractor and trailer, well, carrying things over your shoulder, tractor and trailer, quad bike, and a sort of like a powered wheelbarrow, and also a horse. You know, so different hutters had different solutions for. In fact, the horse was definitely one of the best ways of getting the materials up onto the site. So different solutions, you know, will be appropriate in different places. The waste management and pollution, as I say, I don't think there needs to be any pollution, but all the huts would have their own compost toilet. That's the way they're working in the sites that I know. They all have their own compost toilet, sometimes, usually outdoors, but sometimes built into the structure of the hut itself, which eats into your 30 square meters, but not by very much. You know, the technology of compost toilets has come on a long way. So there are, you know, perfectly good sort of modern ways of doing that. And I won't go into the details just now. And finally, on your biodiversity impacts, yes, I think, yes, obviously there will be an impact on the sort of most immediate habitat, which is, you know, around the hut, and especially if people have dogs, that's going to be a disturbance effect. But, you know, we're talking about very, very limited areas compared to, you know, sort of the hinterland of the forest or the woodland or the habitat or whatever it is. So long as we're not talking about hundreds of huts, you know, then I think the impact will be quite small and located just around the immediate area of the hut. And the group of people who are the responsible hutters in that site will need to think about how to sort of minimize that impact. And, you know, there's issues around bringing in exotic plants, for example, and having a little garden. Well, that may be okay in some places, but there'll be other places where that's not appropriate. And I dare say the landlord, the landowner, in this case, a community woodland, could have quite a bit to say. Well, you can put it in a lease, you know, you can't do that. You know, you can put various things in the lease about what you can and can't do. And if they feel like, you know, there's a good reason for not doing A, B, and C, then they can stipulate that in the lease. So I think all of that can be sorted out reasonably easily. And yeah, I mean, every site's going to be different, and every site's going to kind of come up with different solutions. Sharon?
Thank you, Barbara. We've got 3 more questions, Donald. Next is Jim. Thanks, Jim.
Unmute myself. 3 questions, 2 about planning, 1 about money. What's the typical ground rent or the kind of band of ground rents that are available? The second 2 questions are about planning. If there was a group of, say, 10 to 15 huts, is there a planning consideration required by planners about parking space? You know, I know you mentioned parking space, not immediately to them. So although there's, you know, designations for the hutting, is there a planning problem regarding, you know, additional parking? And the third area was just to follow up on the question about huts for let. Does that follow the same sort of planning allowance that you've got for an ordinary hut if it's not being used in a typical way, but if it's been rented out?
Okay, really good questions, Jim, and I'll pass over to Richard in a moment. Ground rent, the sort of the magic figure, which is kind of quoted a lot of the time, is £1,000 a year per hut. I mean, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It depends on various circumstances. If you're trying to be inclusive, then it might be a bit less, you know, because we don't want to price people out of having a hut. So, you know, it's a balance between extracting the maximum amount of money that you think you can extract versus, you know, being as inclusive as possible as to, you know, who might come and be part of the hut site. But I'll pass the other 2 planning questions over to Richard.
Thanks, Donald. Hi, Jim. Hope you're doing okay there. Not seen you for a while.
35 years.
Probably, yeah, probably. Yeah, the approach we've taken with car parking on every development is that we've provided 1 space for each hut, which, I mean, there's no real formal basis for that other than anticipating what the roads authority would ask for in a planning application, so that they would assume that everybody would arrive by car, which isn't the case. But on the basis that they potentially could do 1 space per hut seems to be acceptable so far on all the sites we've done. Just in practical terms, you probably also want to think about if everybody did turn up in a car one day, but there are huts being built, Is there a need for a little bit of small-scale construction traffic here and there? And where would materials be stored if they were in transit from delivery up to the hut? So a few practical things to think about. The point on letting these buildings out over short-term lets is that in planning terms is a different thing. That becomes then a different class of a use. It becomes a commercial operation. The basis on the light touch with planning for huts is that they are off-grid. They are used by either individuals or family members who will go there from time to time. It's low-key. As soon as you start introducing, changeovers of people on a 2 or 3 day rent, new people are coming to the site the whole time. There's a greater level of waste produced, for example. There's pressure then to add a higher level of services, which potentially has a higher impact. So it is considered as a different use in terms of planning. I don't know if that answers your questions, does it?
It does. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Okay, next up we've got Jen.
Hi, yeah, I'm based up in the Northwest Highlands. I live in Liverpool, but I have a croft that's about 20 minutes drive away from me. I'm very lucky to have this croft. I've been searching for years and years, and my background is a conservationist, working with communities, and there's a house on the croft that's been decrofted and is going to be for sale soon, but it's way in the NC 500 prices. So what we would like to do as a family is build a simple hut so that we can work the croft and be there, for periods of time, a week or a weekend or whatever. So I know it's not community woodland related, but the community part comes into going back to local people, as well as us using it. I would like on an informal basis, local families to use it. Even campsites are expensive and fully booked around here. If you're a local family and you don't want to go far, and even Liverpool, there's kids that don't get out, camping and stuff like that. So one of the things I would really like to see my hut used for is that kind of informal basis for local families that want to connect with their local environment, but not go too far or need much equipment or whatever. So that's my, I suppose it's related to, was it Jim's question before, in that it's related to insurance and how do you insure a hut, and presumably you're not supposed to let other people stay in it, and that might impact the insurance. How you might fund a hut, and also are there any groups that need to practice building a hut? This is my kind of way of wondering if there's, because I would like to learn. I don't have the confidence, I don't have the, I suppose, tools or anything, but I would love to do a group build of this hut using reclaimed materials and whatever else. So yeah, questions relating to all of those things. I don't know if that's a clear enough, Donald, for you.
No, that's really helpful, and I mean that's a really interesting situation, which is going to be replicated in quite a few places, in the crofting areas particularly. It depends. Yeah, the answer is it depends. I think you can build a hut on the croft and for you to use intermittently, and the recreation of your choice is working the land of the croft. So that's all perfectly fine. I don't think there's any funding available to do that. I don't know where you would find the funds, unless crofting world is kind of like a world unto itself. So, I mean, there may be funds available that I don't know about. Local families to use, well, it's a nice idea. I think it depends, like, do you charge? Do you advertise? Is it a kind of like a sign up at the road end, saying, for hire? in which case I don't think you could. It would be it wouldn't be in the spirit of the of hutting. But you know, if you own a hut and you've got friends who would like to use your hut, you're perfectly entitled to invite your friends to use your hut. You know, when you're not there, you know, it's that's completely at your discretion. So how you kind of you know pitch that. I mean, if it's very low profile and it's people that you know and you can vouch for, and it's like they're friends of yours, well, then I don't see that being a problem. That's part of the beauty of having a hut, is that you can lend it to other people.
Yeah, good, because I'm embedded in the community. I know most of the local families, and you know, as a child myself, so you know that I think it would be a word of mouth thing.
Yeah.
For close friends, obviously, I'd tell them, but then it would be a word of mouth thing. And if they wanted to give, say, a wee donation towards, I don't know, toilet roll or something, they could otherwise. So yeah, pretty informal. No advertising. Yeah.
Well, that's it. Well, if you keep it at that level, you know, it's basically your friends that you're inviting to the hut, then that's not a problem. Insurance, you'd have to check out the insurance. That would you'd have to make sure you're covered. People do insure their huts. I mean, you know, they can blow over, burn down. I mean, lots of things can happen. So yes, you do need insurance. And learning skills. Well, yeah, if you can. We've got the 1,000 Huts Facebook group, which is quite active, Reforesting Scotland's 1,000 Huts Facebook group, and in there people are talking about projects that they're doing. I know that people at Carnock would love to have a helping hand sometimes, and you know, just come to a personal arrangement with people who are building their own huts. There are a few businesses out there who are building huts now on demand, and you might be able to get some training opportunities with them. But I think basically just reach out to the community of aspiring hutters and offer your services and work something out, and that should be possible. Good.
Thank you very much.
Sharon?
Thank you, Jim. We've got 2 more questions. So Andrew first and then Abriakan. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. I wanted to just add to what Valerie was saying about, you know, waste management. Our site at Falkland, in the lease, it's the responsibility of the estate to remove off-site the toilet waste. Most of us now are using a hot composting toilet that doesn't require separation. And we now have a very active vermiculture setup just off the car park. And the 80,000 worms, or so the man said, are doing a magnificent job. What leachate we are getting from it, when there's bound to be some, is clear and odorless. And the estate tell us that that's working very, very well. If I could just also add that on the site, which Richard's very familiar with, a track was put in to enable building material and so forth to get up to the sites. It's a requirement in the lease that vehicles are left in the car park. We have parking for 15 huts for the 15 plots. But of course, common sense, we all remember common sense, should prevail. And if we have families coming in late on a Friday evening and it's chucking it down with rain, well, of course, they will drive up to near their hut, decant. And if it's a single mother with her children, she won't be expected to drive back down to the car park and then walk back up through the woods. She'll move the car in the morning. And lastly, Donald touched on this. It's working together and deciding things together. So it's a requirement on our side that you become a member of the Hutters Association. One of you, in our hut, it's my wife, is our hut rep. And it's my wife because I'm the hut rep for the newly completed and handed over Reforesting Scotland's Hut of Wellbeing. And I would end by saying that it's been a great project, and our first guests will be coming in to use the hut from the middle of this month. And we've been very, very fortunate to link up with the Fife Health and Social Care Partnership, because we're okay at getting huts built, but how do we get folk to come and use it? Well, that's being managed by them, and they're linked in with all of the care organisations in Fife. And Alan Carter has changed the name. It's now called the Howf. It's the Hut of Wellbeing for Fife. And we hope it'll be a model for other communities who may wish to do something similar, and we can help by what we've learned from our experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a fantastic project, and it's so good to see it, you know, coming to fruition. And well done, all you guys.
Thank you, Andrew. And a Brecon. Not sure who's there from
Hi,
Brecon.
Suzanne. That's Suzanne.
Oh, hi,
here.
Suzanne.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you mentioned on the way through, Donald, that you had lessons learned from Carnock.
Yeah.
So 2013 to now, I know we've had COVID in between, but give us a rundown on all the lessons you've learned and how you would do things differently. That would be useful.
Well, I'm not sure I can give you all the lessons learned, but no, I think the main thing I think we'd have done differently would have been we'd have got a legal person involved at an earlier stage, because the route we had to go down with Forestry and Land Scotland was quite legal and administrative, and you know, I can see why, because it was a pioneering thing for them and they didn't want to put a foot wrong. And they're a government department, and the thing they hate most is being criticised. You know, that's what they live in fear, mortal fear of. You know, so they wanted to do it by the book, and we were very naive, and so I was kind of leading the project as a forester, not as a lawyer. And I think we should have had some legal advice or legal support at a much earlier stage, who could have taken us right through the, you know, the lease agreement and through all the different forms that we had to work our way through. That'd be the main thing. We lost momentum at various stages on the journey, mainly because of that bureaucracy, because of that legal stuff that we had to sort out. And I mean, if we'd been able to sort of go bang, 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 we could have done it in 2 years instead of 11 years, you know, and the huts would have been lived in, you know, for the last 9 years, you know, instead of just going up now. Because with the best will in the world, you know, people are busy and then they get distracted, and you know, other things happen in their lives. So out of the first 12 people we had, there's 12 sites. Out of the first 12, we lost 9. It dwindled to 3, and so 3 of them kept going, and good for them, you know. Showed real persistence. But 9 dropped out, and they were all for great reasons, you know. They were all sort of things that happened in the family, and jobs, and moving away, and you know, lots of things had happened. So nobody fell out out of those 9. All 9 left for perfectly good reasons, and were sorry to go, you know. But we got another 9 people in, and they were enthusiastic, and we've had a few changes since then, not so much. And we've ended up with sort of like a really strong bunch of 12 individuals, couples, families who are now the Carnock Hutters, and are very proud to be so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. We've got a comment in the chat from Barbara. She's asking how you keep caravanners away. Presumably lock gates are a fire risk.
Well, we've got a lock gate at Carnock. It's a forestry road. It's off a forestry road, and so there's a locked forestry gate at the road end, which is actually a combination lock. So people are, once they know the combination, they can get in. That's quite handy, having that lockable barrier. I guess you need to think about a lockable barrier if it doesn't exist already. Yeah, I suppose if there wasn't that lockable barrier, I suppose, yeah, people could take a caravan into the car park. They wouldn't get any further than the car park, but they could take it into the car park, and then they would have to, you'd have to get rid of them in some way or another. Yeah, no, we haven't had to face that one, but I think some kind of lockable barrier is a very good idea.
Interesting. Richard's come back and said the same. They have the same at his site. So there's maybe an answer there. Valerie's put her hand up again. Valerie, and you come.
Yeah, sorry, it was just if you could go back. You said you would address the how does a landlord assess their land for allowing huts?
Yeah, well, this is a kind of question for CWA, really. You know, if there is interest amongst your members on hutting, you know, if people who are interested can contact Sharon, contact CWA, then it'd be really nice to have a discussion about how we could best support you. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but maybe something could be organized whereby you could ask questions and get answers, and also or do a forum like this, or also have a site visit, because I know I've done several site visits now to different groups, and you know, and they found that quite helpful. So yeah, I think if there's a demand, I would think CWA would have a look at it and try and respond.
Okay.
Absolutely. If there is a demand, we will do whatever we can to either signpost you in the direction where you can get support, or if there's enough people, then we can pool resources and have people come in to support in another forum like this. So please get in touch if you have any more requests. We've got time for maybe a couple of more questions. We've got more hands up now. Bev, can you come?
Hi, Donald, good to see you again.
Yeah.
One question which somebody previously just raised about what you refer to as people dropping out. So say somebody decided to move on, having built a hut. What are the people's rights legally, as far as if they wanted to pass that hut on or sell it to somebody else? What are the implications to the landowner? Because you could potentially end up with effectively a tenant on your land that you really don't want.
Yeah.
So what are hutters' rights in that sense? Yeah,
no, it's a very good question, and Carnock it was covered by the lease. You know, did very detailed sort of 12-page, 15-page lease which Forestry and Land Scotland provided, which basically said you can't have subtenants and so on. So if you go, let's step back. Most situations there won't be a lease like that from the landowner, but there should be a voluntary agreement between the landowner and either the individual hutter or the group of hutters, and within that voluntary agreement should be specified what happens when somebody wants to leave, when somebody wants to not have their hut anymore. That should be discussed and agreed and written down, and then it's in the voluntary agreement, and then that's what guides the hutters whenever that happens, because it will inevitably happen at some point. I mean, my suspicion is that most people will enjoy their huts, and when they're no longer able, due to age or whatever, to look after them, then they would want to pass them on to the next generation, and that should be facilitated, but it would have to be written down and it would have to be an agreement.
Thank you.
And every situation is different, so yeah, there's no one size fits all for that.
Good question, Liv. Thank you. Okay, and Philip, you're next.
Hi, thank you. It's less of a question for Donald, but it does relate to the question earlier about suitability of community woodland sites for hutting. And really, for other community woodlands out there, we were lucky enough last year to secure some funding from Scottish Forestry's Community Fund in order to pay for a feasibility study for the area that we had in mind for a hutting site. So that was very useful. It's still ongoing. Our next step would now be to take it to pre-planning with the local authority. But it was useful to have that study from our own ideas about wanting huts and where we might have them, to have that firmed up with. It was actually Richard Heggie who we're grateful for producing that study. So it's really just for the community woodlands to know that that was available. Obviously, with it's no guarantee of getting that money every year, but that might be worth an avenue for some funding for some feasibility work.
Again, bat that back to CWA, and I'm sure Sharon, you'd want to promote that possibility.
I absolutely can. Philip, maybe if I could email you, then we can get some more information off you and we can share that in with the rest of our members. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Perfect. Richard's also put a comment in the chat for those of you that can't see it. It says that some key considerations for site selection, so flood risk, access and sight line, nature destinations such as SSSI, ancient woodlands, etc., topography, planning policy, so check the council's local development plan, proximity to houses and potential nuisance, active travel options, getting there on foot, bus or bike. So lots to consider there. Richard, your hand's up when you come.
Just to add to that, what we've been trying to do with the planning end of the hut applications from the pilot project really is kind of develop a standard approach that other people can adapt to suit their own application, and that's meant it's easy to point people towards information that already exists. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to then take it on yourself. You know, there are people that can help you, but it gives you an understanding from the outset of the kind of information that's involved, the kind of arguments you might need to make, the kind of concerns that you might need to address. And you can find all of these old applications. When I say old, I mean, you know, last year or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago or whatever. If you go into the council's website and look for their planning applications, you can search through all the planning applications that they've had over recent years. And if you search for hut or hutting, or you might have to say recreational hut, you normally would be able to find the planning applications that have been made in any authority area, and then you can see the documentation. You can see what sort of sites have been selected, how the planners have responded. So it's a really helpful resource for people who are at the early stages, thinking how they work through this and trying to get a better understanding of the process. I think if Sharon, if there's any follow-up questions, I'll happily, you know, if you round up a few more questions and email me, I'll happily do what I can just to point people in the right direction on that. If it's helpful for me to provide some of the reference numbers for the applications like Carnock and Falkland and others, then I can do that for you too, to make it easier to find them.
That would be super, actually, Richard. So yes, if you wouldn't mind just emailing me, and then and we can connect and I can then share out with participants on this call. That's wonderful, thank you. Okay, any final questions at all from anybody? Well done, you have been a terrific audience. I'm just going to share my screen here. If you wouldn't mind, oh, you've all disappeared. Where are you? There you are. If you wouldn't mind providing us with some feedback, if you have your mobile phone there, if you could take a little wee screenshot just now of the QR code. If not, I'll email you all out with the feedback form. But Donald, on behalf of CWA and Richard for your input as well, thank you so much. That was extremely informative. Lots of great questions, so you've clearly got people thinking as well. Thank you to all of you who have attended. You've been very participatory, so very grateful indeed. The recording will be going onto YouTube, but it'll be a week or two before we get that up there, and I will send out a PDF of the slides so that you have a copy. So thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Thank you, and go for it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Thanks,
Thanks,
folks.
Val.